Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I have a wonderful guest on. She's been on my show a couple times before, and of course I couldn't wait to have her back. I feel like it's always a good time when I talk with author and psychotherapist Beverly Engel. Beverly has just released a new book, Put Your Past in the Past: Why You May Be Reenacting Your Trauma and How to Stop. So hopefully so their book is going to be released on March 18th. We may release this podcast before that comes out, but definitely go check out her books. She is definitely one of the authors that I endorse and has a wonderful plethora of books on emotional and sexual abuse. And so she and I are going to talk about the book today and about sexual abuse and sexual trauma. So full disclaimer there, extra disclaimer rather. So if that's triggering to you, it may be an episode you want to, skip or maybe come back to on a later date. And she and I are going to be discussing the book and so much more juicy stuff. Hello and welcome to the show, Beverly.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you back. I think this is your third time on our show.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. So for our listeners who are listening to you, tell us who you are, what you do, and what's the passion behind your work.
Well, I've been a psychotherapist for a long time. I
Okay.
guess 35 years or something. I'm losing count. And I've been specializing in working with people who have been traumatized, uh, especially people who have been abused or neglected growing up and who have issues because of that.
Okay.
People who were sexually, physically, emotionally abused growing up, and adults who are abused like that.
Okay.
And this book comes out of having so many clients who have been experiencing traumatic trauma and traumatic reenactments, where they start reenacting their past trauma, even if they're not aware of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have blocked out trauma.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to face it. They don't want to face that somebody they loved dearly could hurt them the way they did.
Mm.
They don't want to face it because they tend to blame. We know that victims tend to blame themselves
Yeah.
for abuse. They don't want to face it because of that. So there's lots of reasons why they don't want to face it. And because they don't face it, and because they don't process the trauma, they end up unconsciously repeating it in some way.
Yeah.
The main way that we know about is people tend to get involved with the same kind of abusive, neglectful, rejecting people that they had in their family, particularly their parents.
Absolutely. Yes. A lot of times, in working with victims of sexual abuse, there is questions about actual experiences versus imagined or imagined experiences, and how can victims know the difference between, like, gosh, this was so long ago, it's a distant fog, I don't know if this memory is real or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I was
Yeah.
hoping you could share a little bit about, like, how can a person know, you know whether or not their experiences are real or not.
Yeah, it's really difficult. But my sense, my feeling is that if somebody has a memory, no matter how vague, there's something there. Okay.
Yes.
That it might not have happened in that exact way,
Sure.
but something happened. And I always encourage my clients to trust their memories, trust their feelings, especially
Mm,
trust their emotions. Maybe the actual event is different than they're remembering, but the
yeah.
feelings are probably the same.
Yeah.
If they remember, let's say they remember a dark figure coming into their bedroom at
Yeah.
night, and they suspect it was their father. They don't want it to be their father, but they suspect it was. They can get easily talked out of that. Like, my
Mhm.
father wouldn't do that. They don't want to believe that my father would
Yes.
do that to me. Um, and so they can talk themselves out of it, but they can't talk themselves out of the feeling.
Mm,
And what reenactments are all about is are unprocessed feelings, unprocessed trauma. So I will talk to them and say, we don't have to decide right this minute whether
sure.
or not it actually happened or whether it was your father or somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Your situation with the court, that's different. Okay. But
Mm-hmm.
I have the leeway as a therapist to just let them go with it.
Yeah.
And I do that. I ask them, especially to stay in touch with their body. When you talk to me about what happened, pay attention to what's going on with your body. Your muscles tight? Is your throat tight?
Yeah.
Is your stomach upset? What's going on with you? And that's evidence that
Yeah.
something has happened. And so I just really go with trust your feelings. You don't have to make a decision right now as to whether it happened. And let's just talk about it. Let's talk about what you
Absolutely.
think happened and most importantly, what you feel about it.
Yes. So let's just say that like someone is coming to you, as many people have, and they have this suspicion that maybe they've experienced some sort of trauma, like what your expertise is in. What should they do about it? Like, what are the first steps that they should take in towards doing anything? Should they do anything?
Well, if they are reenacting, if they're, or maybe they can't call it, they don't call it
Right.
reenactment.
Yes.
But is there something going on in their life today? Are they
Yes.
being self destructive? Do
Mm-hmm.
they have a pattern of getting involved with the same kind of abusive partner? Um, are they, involved with people who keep treating them poorly, even if they're
Mm-hmm.
not being abused? Are they being treated poorly? Or, do they have a pattern of being abandoned or
Yeah.
betrayed by their partners? So I have them like take a little history and really look at, what's going on in their life. And
Mhm.
most people in that situation will discover that they're either reenacting it overtly by getting involved, say, with the same kind of person, by being self destructive. Maybe they have an alcohol or a drug abuse issue, but there's some way that it's showing up in their life. And so we want to honor that. We want to look at it and say, okay, what's really going on here? Why are you needing to do that?
Yes.
Um, why are you needing to reenact this in some way? Why are you needing to treat yourself as badly as you were treated before? You
Sure.
know?
Sure. And I feel like even reenactment needs to even be broken down a little bit because I feel like in today's day and age, everyone's so into TikTok, everyone's so into social media or just online dating. And when we're kind of in these circles with our peers, everyone is a lot of people are quick to say, oh, the dating scene is trash. Men are trash, women are trash. My friend so and so is having the same exact experience that I am. And she's also experiencing people are trash. So, how can people be sure that this is reenactment versus like just, I guess, societal norms or just over broad generalizations, I should say, about how society is.
Yeah, there can be some broad
Yeah.
generalizations, but usually if you look a little closer at your own personal history,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to show up.
Yeah.
Okay. If your mother was very rejecting of you and abandoning of you, it's not a stretch if you discover that you keep getting involved with men who are rejecting and abandoning, okay?
Yes.
If your father was physically abusive, it's not a stretch to figure out, if you keep having, relationships with abusive men,
Yeah.
that's not a stretch. So we
Mhm.
just have to help you connect the dots, help you see the connection between your childhood and the reenactment.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you there. And I feel like reenactment is, and maybe you might have some thoughts on this, but I feel like reenactment is stronger or like harder to stop when you have that abusive personality still very much a part of your life, right? Like you have that
Right.
abusive mom, that abusive dad, or brother, or whomever. How do people go about tackling reenactment when they have that primary person in their life that is a strong motivating force
Yeah.
or strong trigger, I should say?
Right, right. Well, I write about that at the last half of the book or
Yeah.
last fourth of the book,
Yeah.
where I talk about, really looking at your relationships and the troublesome relationships and figuring out what you want to do.
Yeah.
Some people will want to, if once they're in touch with it, once they realize how they've been affected by, say, their rejecting mother, maybe they will choose to go and have a talk with their mother.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And maybe they won't, because it's very difficult to confront an abusive, neglectful, demanding, whatever parent. And some people don't ever do it, and you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
You can confront them in a letter that you don't send. You can do some role playing, like walk around the house and tell them off. That's really empowering, just to walk around and say everything you ever
Mm-hmm.
wanted to say. A lot of people don't want to sever the tie with their parent. They still
Yes.
love their parent. They still may even have hope for their parent changing, which I tend to discourage because this doesn't happen very often.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if they want to maintain their relationship with their parent, there are other ways of confronting, through letter writing, through talking out loud, through role playing. They can get the same feelings out that they would in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I help them decide, is this a safe person for me to talk to? Or is this an unsafe person? And is it safe for me emotionally? They may be safe in the sense they're not going to hit you, but is it going to be too devastating to you if they come back with some criticism
Mm-hmm.
and that will devastate you? I'll give you an example. At the end of my mother's life, she had been pretty horrible to me just before that, but
Oh
she
man.
called me up and said, I'm sorry, and I forgave her and came back before she died. And we talked a little. She never talked much. But she asked me, she said, I'm so sorry and whatever. And I said, I forgive you because I assume, although you've never told me much, that your childhood was pretty bad. I
Yeah.
assume that your parents didn't treat you very well. And she said, oh no, my mother was so loving and so wonderful. I cried every day of my life when she died. And I
Well.
said, well, I'm glad, but I also know that in our family, I had three alcoholic uncles, and you were close to being alcoholic too. So I know that comes from somewhere. I know it's even
Yeah.
genetic. And she said, well, your grandmother did drink a lot. And she said, in fact, she was killed when she was walking down the street, she was drunk and she was walking down the middle of the street and she was hit by a car.
Wow.
That's how
Wow.
she was killed. She'd never told me that story. So I thought I was really ahead to get to know a little bit. And so the fact that she told me, I felt that she was being a little bit more vulnerable and wonderful, to
Mm-hmm.
tell me that was very brave. But then she immediately turned around and said, well, you used to drink a lot too when you were a teenager. You'd come home and you were falling over and slurring your words, and so you're not perfect either. So she had to come back at me, had to get me. Okay. And so that's important to remember. You might get a little bit more information from your parent than you
Mm-hmm.
ever wanted or that you do want, but be prepared for a slam.
Some
Okay.
blowback. Yeah, some blowback, and then
Because
bringing you in and telling you that you're not so great either.
right.
Yeah, that
So you have to,
defensiveness.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to walk into that with your eyes wide open if you're going to do anything in person. Okay. And it's just as effective to do it with letters and talking out loud to them as if they were
Mm-hmm.
there. Go ahead.
Do you find that out of all of those exercises that people find more benefit in one over the other?
It depends on the person. Some people really get a lot out of writing things down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And other people feel much more empowered when they can say something.
Yeah.
Um, I teach people, especially women, how to say no because it's so
Yes.
empowering. Even the word, just the word no,
Yeah.
women have such a hard time with it. So I have some exercises that I teach in various books about how a woman can say no to something. She can
Mm-hmm.
imagine that she's talking to her father who sexually abused her. And she can imagine his face. She might even get a photograph and put it up somewhere and just say no, no.
Yeah.
Maybe she can't get to the place where she can say, you shouldn't have sexually abused me, or no, you shouldn't abuse me. But she can just say the word no. And it is so incredibly empowering to someone, especially if that person was a really scary person, a big person who was physically, emotionally abusive, and
Mm-hmm.
that she would never in a million years be able to stand up to. But if she can imagine she's standing up to him and she can begin to learn how to say no with various voice tones, various volumes, and really practice it, it does carry over into her life and it can help her deal with that trauma
Mm.
that was related to that person.
I like that. And you mentioned, again, we talked about reenactment outside of like maybe attracting the same types of partner over and over, or showing up in like maybe romantic relationships the same way. What are some other clues that someone is maybe reenacting their trauma specifically?
Well, re-victimization is the second most important way.
Mm-hmm.
72% of women who were sexually or physically abused tend to be re-victimized again later on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a high
Mm-hmm.
percentage. So people who were victimized tend to be re-victimized in some way, especially women. Men do too,
Yes.
but it's really high for women. So re-victimization, um, you know, you were emotionally abused growing up. Your mother was verbally abusive. She put you down constantly. It's not a coincidence that you are in a relationship with somebody who's re-victimizing you by putting you down. Or
Yeah.
if you were sexually abused, we know there's a high rate when you were sexually abused to be abused again, to be raped as a teenager, to be in a sexually abusive relationship. Sexually abusive marriages do exist. So that sexual abuse reoccurs in some
Yeah.
way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for males and females. Males don't talk about it as often, but they're definitely re victimized.
I agree. And I think, in my line of work, even in addition to the victimization, I think that there are a lot of other things that are born out of that in terms of people who also perpetrate
Yeah.
based on the familiar pattern of victimization. I feel like a lot of behaviors around like kinks and BDSM are born out of victimization. I feel like a lot of people don't like to say that, or that's like, don't
Yeah.
put a bad taste about,
Yeah.
alternative sexual communities. But I do believe that a lot of sexual alternative lifestyles are born out of victimization as well.
I agree 100%. And I know it's not politically correct to point that finger there, but
Uh,
I've had so many clients who've
yeah.
gotten into sadomasochistic relationships,
Yes. Yes.
especially the ones that involve being tied up,
Yes.
being gagged, being hit with
Mm-hmm.
a whip, that
Yes.
kind of thing. when I do get a person who's been victimized in that sense into therapy, they're resistant to it, very strongly
Yes.
resistant. But
Yep.
they haven't come to me until they're really pretty bad off. I mean, physically so bruised and so broken that
Yeah.
have to kind of face it. They don't want to face it. But just think about how compelling it must be for them to put themselves in that position. Sure, a lot of people get talked into it, okay? But to put themselves in that position when they've been abused before,
Mm-hmm.
and to talk to themselves and talk themselves into it and tell themselves this is not harmful when they're
Mm-hmm.
walking away with bruises and cuts and horrible, harm to them. They have to really be in denial to keep telling themselves it's
Yeah.
okay, you know, and
Yeah.
to check with how am I feeling after one of these episodes? Okay. Am I feeling good about myself? Am I feeling empowered? I mean, if I'm the one who's doing the tying up and the hitting or whatever, I feel
Yeah.
empowered. But if I'm the receiver, well, how do I feel when I walk away?
Mm-hmm.
What is it doing to me, not just physically, but emotionally?
I agree. I agree 1,000%. And I feel like that's not checked into or looked into as much as it should be a lot of times until it can be too late or things have gone way too
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
So
Now,
yeah,
to balance it, I have to say, I have known couples and people who are into that lifestyle who are not hurting each other
right,
physically,
right.
and they're really careful not to hurt each other,
Yeah.
and
They
they
have
have safe
really good
words,
consent and boundaries around that. Right.
right? Right. And I have had clients who do say they feel empowered when they are in the position of being the giver. They do feel empowered.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I'll balance it there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, so I feel like you've given us some really good tips on how to identify, that someone is reenacting. Um, and I guess when they come to you and they finally, someone like yourself, and they finally get that epiphany that, hey, I am engaging in some cyclical behaviors. What are some of the first steps that a person can take to stop that cyclical um, reenactment behavior, especially if they're kind of maybe they're involved with someone or they have been involved with someone for a long time and they're kind of iffy about walking away or they're not really sure that they're in that space to do it. What are some of the first steps they can take to stop that reenactment?
Well, the first step is what we've been talking about, making that connection. Once
Mm-hmm.
they made the connection, then I always encourage them to connect with their feelings, which I've already talked about, but
Yeah.
it's vitally important. I want them to explore what did the original trauma cause them to feel and
Yes.
what do they feel when they're reenacting.
Mm-hmm.
And I really spell it out. I focus on, do you feel sadness and pain? Do you feel anger? Do you feel fear? Do you feel shame? And I ask them to write about those emotions and really connect with them in their body. There's the saying, we can't heal what we don't feel. So that's really important. When I think about my father sexually abusing me, what do I feel? I feel afraid. I feel angry. I feel sad. To identify the feelings, that's super, super
Yeah.
important to identify the emotions.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think even that part there can be a bit tricky to navigate because, although it sounds really simple, I think a lot of people don't know how to identify feelings per se, like, or just even emotions in the way that they understand what an emotion is, because, part of being an abuse survivor is protecting yourself, your body and your mind protecting itself. And I think a lot of ways that people do that is like intellectualization or denial of of any, or just having just like numbness, I should say, like
Mm-hmm.
mostly feeling numb. So I think like even just understanding what a feeling is or being able to pull that can be
Right,
very tricky for a lot of people.
right. I go into a lot of detail
Yeah,
about defining
you do.
feelings and what they are and what they feel like. Um, and I give some exercises like a basic grounding exercise. We know
Mm-hmm.
that trauma victims can often kind of go through life disassociated. They they disassociated when they were being abused, and it's kind of becomes a habit where they're not really present very often. We know that, for example, a child who's sexually abused will leave their body
Mm-hmm.
as a protection against having to face what's happening to them. And
Mm-hmm.
other kind of victims too will get in the habit of doing that. If even when they're not being traumatized, even when they're just being stressed a little bit, they'll automatically go away. And so we have to bring them back. And grounding, putting your feet on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
taking deep breaths will bring you back to the present. And if you're talking about your feelings or trying to connect with your feelings and you're not really in your body
Yeah.
and you're not really present, it's not going to do any good. So we have to start every time we try to connect with grounding, getting yourself back here. Okay. And some people can't even stay very long at all. They do the
Mm-hmm.
grounding, they may even go through an elaborate grounding exercise. Feet on the ground, deep breathing, open your eyes, clear your eyes, look around the room, try to find all the blue color in the room. There's lots of different exercises like that to bring you back. And some will do an elaborate grounding exercise and be back for, a minute, and they'll be gone again and won't even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, it's really important to practice over and over and over, being present and being in your body
Mm-hmm.
and connecting with feeling.
The other question I have, in terms of talking about repeat patterned victimization versus someone who may be just sort of stuck in victimhood. I don't know if you can sort of talk about that a little bit. How do you know that? How can one understand if they're being victimized versus whether they are just overly identifying with something being done to them? Like they feel like there's
Mm-hmm.
always some sort of persecution or, wrongdoing towards them that they overly identify with, and they
Right.
sort of hang on to that as an identity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if we can help them connect with their emotions, so what does a victim feel the most? They feel helpless, and which is connected to fear. So I
Mhm.
would talk to them about their fear and how can I help them feel empowered? You know, um, do they suffer from learned helplessness
Mm,
because they tried things in the past and it never worked? They were never able to break away from a person, or maybe in their family. There's some families that scapegoat one person, one child, and that child is always victimized by everybody in the family. That's
mm.
a real problem.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
because how can the person ever see themselves differently if the
Yes.
whole family sees them, as the problem or as the victim? So there's a lot of work to do in terms of helping them to see themselves better and to find ways to be empowered.
Mm. I
Maybe
like
it's
that.
maybe it's again going back to imagining they're talking to their older brother who's always beating them up, and telling their brother off, and standing up to him. Maybe it's about their mother who always ignores them when they make a complaint, and so they keep complaining because no one ever listens to them.
Yeah.
So what do they need to say to that person? How do they need to act differently with that mother? Instead
Mm.
of pleading for her to listen, what boundaries can they set with their mother? What can they do internally to say, I'm not going to give my power to my mother anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to depend on her someday coming around and believing me. I'm going to believe in myself. If I go to her and tell her my older brother's been beating me up and even is sexual with me at times, and she refuses to believe me, number one, I've got to believe me. Number two, I need to do something about my brother. If it means just avoiding him,
Mm,
getting away from the house, getting, not being in within his clutches,
yeah.
or eventually, does it mean me standing up to him?
Yep.
But I can't depend on my mother to save me. So I'm going to have to save myself.
I
So
like
it's
that.
changing their belief system, changing their behavior, not waiting for someone to come rescue them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem for a lot of victims is they keep waiting for somebody else
To
to come
rescue.
rescue. And I'm saying, no, you got to rescue yourself.
Yeah.
There may not ever be anybody there.
Then chances are probably more likely than not that no one is going to come and save you. So you have to save yourself. And not only that, but if you're waiting to be rescued, do you really want to put your life in your livelihood in the hands of someone else again?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You talk about dissociation. What is that, and how do people know that they're experiencing dissociation?
Well, it's kind of a fuzzy feeling. These people who are in the habit of dissociating kind of walk through life, kind of everything's kind of faded out. Everything's kind of fuzzy. They don't know that, but it's become such a habit that everything is fuzzy. That's why we have people clear their eyes. Most people don't really know what that means, and yet when you ask them to clear their eyes, they'll do it. Okay? They'll they'll clear their eyes, and once they're in reality, their feet are on the ground, they're breathing, they're clearly seeing, then they feel 100% different. They feel
Mm,
so different. They say, oh my gosh, I feel so different. They can't even necessarily describe it, but it's really about being present. So disassociating is actually leaving your body. It's not being in your body. It's a survival technique, unconscious survival technique to help you avoid trauma that's unbearable. A child who's being sexually abused by an adult, that trauma is unbearable. Okay. I was sexually abused when I was 9. And
mm,
I remember the first day. I
mm,
remember what he had me do the first day.
mm.
And then I know it went on because I have facts that it went on for 3 more months because we stayed in that house for 3 months. But I have no memory of after the first day.
Wow.
I can only assume that he kept doing other things. I have glimpses of things
Mm.
that make me even wonder. I remember he took me to a friend's store. I wonder about, did he introduce me to somebody else? When I left that home and was a couple of blocks away from him, I had a girlfriend, and we would pretend to go there's a tub in the backyard,
Mm-hmm.
a utility tub to wash things. And I would have her go in the tub and take her straps down. And so what I saw was just the top of her chest. And I would pretend to take pictures of her. Now where did I get that?
Mm.
Where in the world did I get the idea to take photographs of my girlfriend with her top down to make it look like she didn't have her top on?
Yeah.
Well, I can only assume it was from that man. So I dissociated. I left my body, and I have no memory of all of that. I have the memory of the first day. I have, some scattered little hints of something, but that's what dissociating is. It protects you from having to face horrible things that are happening to you. It's
Mm.
actually a protection.
When do people dissociate?
Well, like I said, some people who are deeply traumatized dissociate the rest of their life
Wow.
until they're called on it. They don't even know. They're
Wow.
just never really present.
Mm-hmm.
I think you must know some people. I mean, you're a therapist, so you know people,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
but
Absolutely. And I agree with you. There are people that are severely stuck in it. I mean, and people who never go to therapy, right? That never
right,
even sort of have um it never sort of dawns on them, or they've never even heard of that word, or they may
Right.
know that something's not right, or they just may feel like they're just disconnected or off in
Yeah,
space sometimes, but they can't really put fit the puzzle pieces together. So
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people around them will complain, like, hey, where are you?
Yes.
Hey, I'm talking to you, because
Yeah.
they can tell that the person isn't present. You
Absolutely.
know? So,
Absolutely.
and some people only dissociate when they're triggered, when something has reminded them of their traumatic childhood,
Mm-hmm.
traumatic past.
Mm-hmm.
If they're triggered, they automatically become dissociated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for a huge portion of people that are listening to this, and people that you work with, you think that they dissociate during intimacy as well. Like a lot of people
Absolutely.
really disconnect during sex and they sort of check out. They don't even realize they're doing it, or it comes across as like, I just kind of want to get through this, but I'm not
Mhm.
really like, I can't really be here in the moment with my partner. It doesn't really feel good to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, that's so common that if I'm working with a sexual abuse survivor and they're having some difficulties with their partner sexually, I will ask them to consciously try to bring themselves back to the present and
Mm-hmm.
not allow themselves to go away like that. It's not even healthy or safe for them to do
No,
that.
no.
Uh, it's not safe to walk around the world dissociated, first of
Yeah,
all.
it's
You
not.
shouldn't be walking down the street dissociated because you're not safe. But sexually, it's really significant to take deep breaths and make sure you are present if you're going to be
Yeah,
sick. Um,
yeah.
and and if people get triggered very often when they're being sexual with a partner and they're not present, and so I will ask them, make sure you come back, be present. One
Mm-hmm.
technique that really works is take a look at your partner's face and take some deep breaths and tell yourself, this is who I'm with. Some people, when they're having sex, will all of a sudden feel like they're with the perpetrator. They're
Mm-hmm.
with their father. They're with
Mm-hmm.
their uncle who was molesting them. And they have to consciously bring themselves back and say, no, I'm not with my father or uncle. I'm
Yeah,
with my partner, and not start again,
yeah.
not start being sexual again until they can see their partner's face. That's a really good technique for people who do go in and out like that.
I agree. And I mean, that's a good one. But, I also, to people who are listening to the show and they're not really sure, I feel like everyone dissociates to a certain degree. Like, whether or not you've necessarily had sexual abuse or you just had abuse in general, or even like, I remember, for me, like, working in the prison, right? And just having like a not so good encounter with a former supervisor and like driving home, right? And I'm not really present. That's dangerous, right? Driving home because
Okay.
I'm kind of going through the day and like still like mentally trying to process the day and how rough that was. And my mind is there while my eyes are open. I'm not really focused. So I feel like it's kind of like that for most people. Like I'm here, but I'm not here.
Right.
And so, it just kind of goes to show you that we all do it
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And so I think that that's something to be mindful of too. And I think, for people who do it during intimacy, um, is there, I like the exercise you talked about looking at your partner's face. And you were saying before that, it's not really good to dissociate. Is there ever a time when you would advise someone who kind of dissociates during intimacy like that and is having a really hard time to maybe hold off on intimacy for a
Oh,
bit?
yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I would have them, do more work on connecting with their feelings, on releasing the trauma in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, holding off would be really good.
Yeah.
You really are in some ways being re-traumatized. You
Yes.
have sex when you're not in your body.
Yeah.
Okay. it's a form of being re-traumatized because you're not present. You're not really there to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
There are things that can be done to you that you don't really want to be done to you, or it can
Mm-hmm.
go on too long, or it can even be with the wrong person.
Yeah.
We know that people, when we drink or take drugs, uh, that's kind of a form of dissociation. And
Yes.
lots and lots of people who were victims in the past end up being drunk and having sex with some stranger.
Yeah.
There's some aspect of abuse or trauma or being treated poorly, and they're re-victimized then.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. And so I think that that could actually even be a disorder on its own. It's just like really just dissociation and is for a lot of people because it can be so severe.
Yeah.
But I think that that's another thing. I think the other thing is to, like you said, identify triggers. How can people identify when they're being triggered?
Well, it's difficult at first when you start,
Mhm.
but I ask clients to make a triggers list. And triggers are reminders of a trauma. Okay, they're either physical,
Mhm.
emotional triggers
Yeah.
that take you back, that catapult you back into the past, into a trauma. So if you could, think about your trauma and what are the major characteristics of it. Well, my mother, abandoned me when I was 5. I went to live with this couple, and the woman was really cruel to me, and the man was inappropriate with me sexually. Okay, so what could be my triggers?
Yeah.
Well, number one, abandonment. Okay, number one, the top of your list, abandonment.
Yeah.
Anytime you feel abandoned, any time you feel rejected or criticized, that's your number one trigger.
Hmm.
So you can just know that. You number one, know that, and look around and think about your life and realize all the times when you feel the worst. It's when you've been abandoned. Okay.
Hmm.
It's when a friend didn't call you back. It's when a boyfriend stood you up. Okay. It's when
Hmm.
a partner, broke up with you.
Yep.
It's all the times you feel abandoned, rejected. That's a trigger for you. That
Yeah.
means that in addition to the horrible pain you feel when somebody breaks up with you or, doesn't call you back or whatever, you're re experiencing the trauma of your mother abandoning you when you were 5. Okay. It's that simple. It's no different for you emotionally. A friend not calling back, especially a boyfriend breaking up, feels just like your mother leaving you all
Yeah.
alone. Okay. So abandonment is number one trigger.
Hmm.
Think about your other times when you get the most upset and connect that with your childhood. So um, let's say there's a woman at work who keeps on rejecting you. She hands you the worst assignments. She never acknowledges how good you were at this task. You feel like she's just always picking on you. Well, what's the connection? When you were left with that couple, that mother was always critical. It was always
Hmm.
fault. So you connect the present. What bothers you the most in your life? When that coworker is always on me, when someone doesn't call me back, when I get broken up with, and connect that with your childhood. What were the childhood traumas? Being abandoned, being criticized, somebody never being pleased. Start making a list. It will take a
Yeah.
while to make a full list, but you just think about your trauma and when are you most upset and what does it have to do with your child? And
Mm.
then you have a complete triggers list, which is wonderful because then the next time you're triggered, meaning you're freaked out, you're upset, you don't quite know what's going on,
Yeah.
very intense, but you don't know what's happening. You go look at your triggers list and say, okay, oh, there's abandonment right there.
Yeah.
Okay. I just felt abandoned by so and so.
Yeah.
There's that rejection, there's that criticism. And you can find it. Once you find it, you take a deep breath and go, oh, no wonder. No wonder I feel this way. No wonder I freak out when this happens.
Yeah.
And that takes me into something that I really want to stress, and
Yeah.
that's compassion. Self-compassion is the antidote to shame, and it helps us understand ourselves. So let's have you have your triggers list. You finally figure out, whenever I feel abandoned, I really go into crazy me. I freak out, I'm crying, I'm hysterical, but oh, I see, there's a connection with my childhood. And then there's room for self-compassion.
For sure. For
Because
sure.
then we can say, okay, I understand why I act this way. I understand. I feel badly for myself that I act this way. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a stupid person. I'm somebody who's been traumatized and who's going to have a normal reaction to it.
And can you walk us through the steps of self or maybe even learning self-compassion?
Yeah, it's really super important. It's connected with shame. And we know that trauma survivors almost always are riddled with shame.
Yeah.
So we're going to focus on shame, but we do start with helping the person connect with all their emotions and then finally get to shame. Because shame isn't a feeling that's easily identifiable. And it's different for everybody. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, it's like a sinking feeling. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, it's the sense they want to hide. Some people feel completely humiliated. So it's very difficult to identify. So it's good if you've learned to identify your other emotions first, and then you can focus on shame. And shame is, and self-compassion is about being able to identify your suffering. Okay.
Mm.
Shame is self-blame. It's about making yourself wrong. But if something has happened to you to make you feel bad about yourself, it's usually because something bad has happened to you. So we want to help you switch from putting yourself down, just like in this case with learning what the triggers are. I don't have to put myself down for having this trigger if I understand that, of course, I'm going to freak out if I feel abandoned. Who
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't? Who wouldn't with my history? So I can be softer on myself and go,
Yep.
it's understandable. That's the key word. It's understandable that I would freak out every time I feel abandoned. Okay.
Yes.
That's the root of the word of the sentence. It's understandable. If we can be soft on ourselves and say, oh, of course I would act that way. Of course it's understandable that I would be that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what self-compassion is. And then if we can apply that to our shame and say, wait a minute, this happened to me. I was sexually abused. Why am I feeling shame? I didn't do
Mm-hmm.
anything wrong, but I sure suffered. And so I'm going to start being kind to myself and loving about that suffering. I'm going to identify that suffering, and I'm going to start giving myself love and understanding and kindness so that I can heal. Okay. So the shame goes to, it turns into more self compassion, more understanding of yourself. It's understandable that I would act this way.
I love that. And for the listeners who are listening, I did an interview a while back with Dr. Christian Neff, Kristen Neff, sorry. And we'll be sure to link that with this episode so people can, whoever wants to take a deeper dive into self-compassion,
Absolutely.
can certainly do so. But self-compassion is great. I totally agree with everything that you said there. And I think one of the number one questions, and I don't know if you get this a lot, but, you know, um, I think most people who come into therapy, especially with this type of issues, want to know, will I ever be free from this 100%? Will this be 100% eradicated from is it possible that all of these symptoms, this trauma, all of this, what they think is ugliness, can this be 100% eradicated if I follow through the steps? If I go to therapy, can I be 100% free from this?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. Okay, you're never going to be free of it.
Yeah.
But the good news is that you can be so much better in your life and so
Mm-hmm.
less hampered by it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get to the point where you no longer have to identify yourself as a victim,
Yeah.
say, of sexual abuse. You feel like a survivor. And I know it's a cliche to go from victim to survivor to thriver, those words, but people feel that. They
Mm-hmm.
feel when they become a survivor, they feel like it. In
Yes.
my books, I usually talk about the reason why I go back and forth between calling people a victim or a survivor is that you can be on a continuum where
Yeah.
you're continually becoming a survivor, but still feel like a victim. As long as you feel like a victim, it's okay to feel like a victim. You were a victim, you were victimized. You don't
Yeah.
have to instantly become a survivor. Like
Yeah.
so, and it's not a negative thing to be a victim.
It's not.
Victim has become such a dirty word.
It has. I got creamed for that on social media one day. People were like, I am not a victim.
Yeah,
Ah, and I'm like, okay, don't say
yeah,
that word. And I'm like,
yeah,
when did we get like this? And did
yeah,
I like sleep? Oh, did I like miss
yeah,
that overnight or
yeah,
something where people were just, they go feral over that word and I
yeah,
couldn't understand it. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, you know,
yeah. Yeah, but when feedback I've got that feedback for
yeah.
sure. But the feedback I also got was from people who said, I want to be the one to decide when I'm a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suddenly a survivor the
Give
day
me one
after.
second, Beverly. Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Okay, it's
Getting a
okay.
notification. Yes. So go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah, the feedback that you've gotten
yeah,
about that
yeah.
is they want to be the
I'm not.
one to decide.
Yeah, I want to be the one to say when I'm a survivor. I'm not
Mm,
instantly a survivor the day I report my rape, and that's how it's reported.
mm,
Now it's become so extreme that, so and so, a survivor of rape or sexual assault. No, I'm still a victim. When I become a survivor, I'll let you know. When I feel like I'm on the road to survival and to
yeah.
heal, I'll let everybody know.
Yeah.
But I don't want that taken away because, see, that I wrote a whole article
Yeah.
on this
Yeah.
because that's denying what happened to me.
Yeah.
If everybody needs to see me as a survivor right away, they're not wanting to know what happened to me. They're not wanting
Yeah.
to face my pain.
Yeah.
And I want to face my pain, number one. And
Yeah.
if you don't want to, that's your business. But I'm going to face my pain and I'm going to tell everybody when I think I'm a survivor.
I like
Okay.
that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I get it. People kind of want to be in charge now that they're sort of rediscovering their voice and reclaiming their power. But yeah, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky
Yeah.
dance. Um, and I'm glad that you've had a similar experience. One of the things that I worry about, and this is maybe, I would say related to more U.S. culture. So I know I have people that watch me in Africa and other, Europe and
Yeah.
other countries, but more so what I've noticed in the U.S., I would say in the past 10, 20 years, is that we are highly sexualized society. Like there's sex on TV, there's sex in cartoons, there's sex in all over media, right? And so
Right.
I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how you advise clients that are, trying to navigate past these cyclical behaviors and things like that when they're having, could be having these cues on a broader spectrum, like on TV, like if they, in a song, they're listening to the radio and, all of a sudden the lyrics are explicit or, whatever, when there's cues on a societal level, if that makes sense, versus
Yeah.
just like, it's in my relationship, those, I feel like that's much easier to navigate. Maybe not easy, maybe easy is not the right word, but I feel like you could be better prepared to navigate that
Yeah.
versus cues like on a broader spectrum where you can just get that at any time.
Yeah, out of the blue, and you
out
don't
of the
even know
blue.
it's
You
coming.
don't
Yeah,
even know it.
yeah. I would talk to them about it just like I talk about triggers. You don't know what's going to trigger you. You don't
Hmm.
know whether and you can preface it with, we are a very sexualized society,
Yeah.
and it's hard to watch a movie. It's hard to listen to music without having something about sexuality brought up. And
Yes.
so it's understandable, again, use those words, it's understandable
Hmm.
that you would be triggered. And so don't be hard on yourself and give yourself permission to exit. You don't
Yeah.
have to keep listening to the song. You don't have to keep listening to watching the movie. I have lots of clients who just really have a hard time with a lot of movies that
Hmm.
are, and they try to kind of, go through and figure out whether this is going
Yeah.
to be a movie that's going to be highly sexual, and they can't. It'll be something that comes up, out of the blue, and there they.
Absolutely.
So giving themselves permission to honor their feelings,
Hmm.
honor what's happening with you. It's okay. It's understandable.
Hmm.
Would trigger you. And just say, I'm sorry, I thought I was going to like this movie, but it's just freaking me out, you know?
Okay.
So I'm put it
Yeah.
off, or I don't want to go see it, or whatever.
Yeah. And how do you advise people that have kind of done this work, the exercises, and things like that, and address the topics that you're talking about in your book, and they're ready to maybe get back out there and start dating or start picking new friends, but they're still a little gun shy, if as you will, that despite their best efforts, they're going to get another one. What do
Yeah.
you say to that?
I suggest they go slowly, especially if they've been super traumatized. I mean, I
Yeah,
work with some people that, it's a miracle they even survived,
yeah,
okay, their childhood. It was
yeah,
so horrendous, and they have so much to repair, so much to mend, so much to heal, that,
yeah.
if they can, self-compassion's great because they can learn to be tender with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They can learn to start giving to themselves today what they didn't get as a child. They,
Yeah.
that's a real, important aspect, is to start treating themselves better than people treated them as a child, to start treating themselves with nurturing and love and care. And that comes from self-compassion, and that comes from facing your suffering, and
Mm-hmm.
that comes from, acknowledging your feelings. So it's all connected. Once they've done all that, they can be more loving to themselves and more patient. Being patient is really huge. If you had a horrendous
Yeah.
childhood, you can't, like you ask people, say, when am I going to be okay? Or do I ever have, am I ever going to be 100%? Well, no,
Yeah.
you're not. You've been through a trauma. We can't deny.
Yeah.
The best we can do is help you heal the trauma. We can't erase it. We can't take it away. Okay. That's denying a part of yourself to say, I want to erase it. I don't like the people who are
Yeah.
super positive and saying, well, that's what made you who you are. And there's so many positive aspects that you look at, turn your life around. I don't like that philosophy. No, it was horrible. I love it when people say, no, it was horrible. It was bad. There wasn't anything good about it. I don't want to hear that, but look, that made you stronger here and stronger there. If that's the case, and I feel that myself, fine, but don't tell me that. Don't tell me it's a good thing
Yeah.
I was raped, because then I got
Yeah.
involved with the women's movement and look at what I made of my life.
Mm-hmm.
No, if I hadn't ever been raped, I would have been better off. Okay. I had to work my way out of that. I had to work my
Yeah.
way to heal it. And I feel proud of myself for that. But no, don't tell me that I was better off, or it was a good thing that I was raped. So, I mean, I've had people talk about that like that.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. If you weren't raped, or if you just look, for me in particular, I heard, well, if you hadn't been sexually abused as a child, you wouldn't have written your first book about healing sexual abuse, and your life would have been completely different. Well, yeah, my life probably would have been very different, and I probably wouldn't have had to struggle with my weight I probably wouldn't have had to struggle with alcohol so much. I would have had an easier way in my relationships. My life would probably have been better. I didn't make it better with this, but I'm grateful that I had the strength to turn it around.
There you go.
I don't
That's
want
it.
to deny what happened, and I'm not going to say it
Hmm.
was a good thing. It wasn't a good thing. So anyway, I got off the track there.
No, it's a good thing that you did talk about that. I do feel like people say that, and I feel like it's their way of trying to comfort people in a way that, it just seems foreign to them, but they're trying to provide some
Yeah,
form of comfort. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And lastly, I know we've sort of powered through the hour, but I did want to ask you, and I feel like this is always my favorite section in your books, is you talk about nudity. And I feel like it's my favorite section because it's like, nudity has always been weird to me because I'm very conservative, very like, what do you call that? Modest, not
Mhm.
conservative, modest. And so whenever I see people that like demonstrate nudity, it's always like, aha. But I was wondering if you could talk about that section of your book and nudity and all that comes with it.
Yeah. I think you're talking about where I describe the forms of sexual abuse, and then
Yes.
I talk about the more subtle forms of
Yes.
sexual abuse that people don't think about. And nudity is definitely one of those.
Yes.
It is a form of sexual abuse for an adult to parade around nude in front of children.
Hmm.
We're not talking about nudist camps, although I'm not on board with those too much either, not when there's kids around. But we're talking about, Uncle Joe walking around the house nude and kind of showing himself off in front of little kids, young kids, and
Where,
starting to be, tantalizing and being sexual with them.
hmm
That's different than, mom coming out of the shower with her towel around her, then going into the bedroom, dropping her towel and drying off and getting dressed. She's not being sexually abusive. Okay. The uncle it's his intention. It's always the intention with
look at
nudity.
me. Hmm.
Yeah, it's either look at me or I'm trying to normalize it so that you'll get undressed and you'll be fine. We do want kids to be able to be comfortable with nudity. We want them to be able to
Mm,
walk around and, with their friends getting dressed and stuff, We don't want them to have to cover themselves up all the time. It's okay if that's where you are, but we want to give the message that nudity can be healthy, but there's the intention of the adult.
hmm
Okay. And there's the even intention of the child.
Yeah.
I'll give you another little quick story. After I was sexually abused, I was very sexualized. I roamed around my neighborhood causing all kinds of trouble. And I was being babysat by, I wasn't being babysat. Their parents were gone these twins, their parents were gone during the day, and I was staying with them in the backyard and playing. Well, I introduced nudity because I'd been sexually abused. Okay. I was like compulsively sexual. Uh, and
When you
so I
say
was,
you introduce nudity, what do you mean by that
well,
first?
I,
Yeah.
I took my clothes off and
Okay.
said, why don't you take your clothes off? That I made it a game. Here, this is fun. But because I'd been sexually abused, I was reenacting my own sexual abuse.
Hmm.
I was being I was being a perpetrator in the sense I don't mean that I literally was, but I was initiating. I was initiating nudity because I was disturbed. Okay, because I was reenacting what happened to me.
So there was an
Most
emotional disturbance there, and
Yeah,
that's yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Most kids who abuse other kids are reenacting their own
They
abuse. It's
do.
just like kids who play with a doll,
Yeah.
and have the doll do things, have people
Yeah.
do things to the doll that were done to
Yep.
them, like in play therapy. They'll do stuff with the doll to show
Yep.
that they were sexually abused. Kids repeat what was done to them. I mean,
Yes, they
that's the
do.
ultimate reenactment.
Yep.
Okay, and they do it to relieve their pain and confusion about what happened to them. They replay it in an attempt to get rid of it. Anyway, so I had these kids take their clothes off. Well, sure enough, their mom and dad came home, found the twins nude and me nude, and asked the kids what's going on. Well, Beverly told us to take our clothes off. Well, I never got to go over there again.
Mm-hmm.
My mother came to get me. She was told what happened, and now I'm this bad. She doesn't know I've been sexually abused, but now I'm this bad kid who had these people take off their clothes, and there's something wrong with me. You know, it was really marked from that time on.
Yeah.
So that's not okay.
Yeah.
Okay, kids playing like that when somebody's reenacting an abuse, that's not healthy, and you never really know. See, it's healthy for kids to walk around in their bedroom with no clothes on. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's the intention of the adults around them? Are they safe being nude around adults? And is somebody disturbed and reenacting something? And we don't know. So I don't blame you for, whatever issues you have with nudity. I'm sure it was involved with somebody trying to do something to you or somebody having a bad intention
Yeah.
around it.
It should definitely raise the alarm bells.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I definitely think um there's something to that. And I was watching, I can't even remember the name of the movie, but it's an old 80s movie where there was a woman who was in a relationship with a man, young couple, and then she couldn't contain herself. She became like almost like a nymphomaniac and had to like sleep with all these older men because she had these issues with her father. And I thought that that was a really well played movie because I think it demonstrates exactly with what you're talking about. And she was like, I can't stop myself. She was like, she was
Yeah.
in therapy and she's like, I don't know what it is. I do love the person that I'm with. But man, I just cannot get through
Yeah.
these dad issues and I'm having a really hard time, so much so
Yeah.
that I'm actually hurting the person that I'm with.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
really, really, and I can't think of the name of it, but it's a great 80s film. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So this has
Well, I like
been,
what you said about the nudity is that, see, the twins' parents had a reason
yeah,
to not want me back.
yeah.
Okay. I didn't have good intentions. I was just a kid and I was innocent in that sense, but I was a sexually abused kid
Mm-hmm.
and I was prone to reenactment. So they had every right to not let me come over again. They
Yeah.
were right.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because I think this happens a lot in schools too, that a lot of people don't talk about that this happens where kids are sexually reenacting. And, when I was, of course, this is years ago when I was coming up in school, they used to put kids who did this in emotional disturbance classroom. I don't know if they still
Mm,
do things like that to that degree. So I know
mm,
they try harder to integrate kids now. But I
mhm,
know, like, when I was coming up, they would be in an emotionally disturbed classroom or
mm,
school for those kids who would
mm,
act out sexually or aggressively like that.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
interesting. But
Yeah.
I feel like this book is great. I can't wait to finish it. So, put your past in the past. Definitely go pick it up by my friend Beverly Engel, who's written a lot of other books that we'll definitely link down below. Beverly, can you tell us what you've got going on? Like if you have anything coming up and how people can reach you if they want to connect with you more.
Well, the best way to reach me is by email, just Beverly at Beverly Engel, ENGEL.com. And no E before the Y, just Beverly, BEVERLY. So that's the best way to reach me. I've got
Okay.
tons of podcasts and I'm going to be keynote speaker at some conferences and stuff. The book's coming out March 18th. So I've got a lot going
Yeah.
on, a lot coming up.
Yeah, and you might see a familiar name in your book, right? Yours
Yeah,
truly. So yeah,
that's
I
right.
love
Thank you for
it.
your endorsement. And I look forward to your book, your next
Thank
book.
you. I look forward to you, yeah, endorsing me also. So yes, and of course, I'm happy to support you any way that I can, and we'll definitely put this podcast. It's always great to have you on. I feel like we always have so much stuff to talk about, and the time just zooms by. Thanks so
Yeah, it's
much.
like a real give and take. You're talking about your experiences as much as I am, so it's great. You
Right,
know,
right. And I don't know what your other podcast experiences are like, because I know sometimes when you do podcasts with other like non-clinical people, it could just
yeah,
be like you're sort of, you're talking about things and they don't really have a whole lot to offer.
right, right. So this is always very enlightening for me and always enjoyable
Yay, I love
because
that.
your stuff too, for sure.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, we've been doing it such a long
Right,
time, right? Yeah,
right.
and I think not only we've been doing it, but I think why we connect so much is we're so passionate about it. Like it goes just beyond just doing the work for us. Like
Yeah,
we're passionate about like helping people and like giving a voice to everything that's happening. So
absolutely.
that's why we connect so well. So, and that's why I always love talking to you.
Well, I enjoy being on for sure.
Thank you. Yay.
Okay.
Okay, so that was my interview with Beverly Engel. I hope that you thoroughly enjoyed that as much as I did. Again, she offered a lot of gems in this podcast, and I'm so excited for the day when her book is released. I cannot wait until it hits the shelves. Folks who have experienced abuse, sexual abuse and things, sexual trauma, I think we'll find a lot of benefit in checking out this book. And until the next time, guys, take care of yourselves and be well.